On the afternoon of March 24, 1944, 335 Italian men were taken from prison cells in Rome, driven to a network of disused quarries on the city's southern outskirts, and shot in the back of the head. The youngest was 15, the oldest was over 70. Most had no connection to the partisan attack the Germans were avenging. The chain of events that killed them had begun the day before, with a 22-year-old medical student pushing a garbage cart through central Rome. The garbage cart contained a bomb. By the time the bomb went off, the men in the prison cells were already dead. They just hadn't been told yet. The order to kill them had come from Berlin the night before. The men who carried it out went home for dinner. The question that haunts this story is not how a deliberate atrocity could be planned in 24 hours and executed in 6. It is how the men who ordered it walked back into civilian life, and how the country that lost 335 sons that afternoon was told for half a century that this was the price of resistance. To understand what happened at the Ardeatine Caves, you have to understand what had happened to Italy in the previous 6 months. Italy had begun the war on the German side. By the summer of 1943, the war had turned against the Axis. The Allies had landed in Sicily. Mussolini had been deposed by his own fascist Grand Council and arrested. The new Italian government, under Marshal Pietro Badoglio, opened secret negotiations with the Allies and, on September 8, 1943, announced an armistice. Italy had switched sides. The German response was immediate and brutal. Within hours of the armistice announcement, German forces began disarming the Italian army across occupied Europe. 600,000 Italian soldiers were taken prisoner and deported to slave labor camps in the Reich. In Italy itself, German troops occupied the country from Rome northwards, installed Mussolini as the puppet head of a new Italian social republic, and treated the population as an occupied enemy. By March 1944, Rome had been under German military occupation for 6 months. The city had a curfew. It had food shortages. It had the Gestapo on Via Tasso, where political prisoners were tortured, and it had a resistance. The Italian resistance in Rome was organized, fractured, and dangerous. Communists, socialists, Catholic Democrats, and remnants of the old Italian army had formed underground networks called the Patriotic Action Groups, the GAP. Their job was sabotage and assassination. By March 1944, the GAP had been making the German occupation costly. They had attacked patrols, they had bombed barracks, they had killed officers in cafes. The Germans were responding with arrests, torture, and reprisals. On March the 23rd, 1944, the GAPI planned an operation that would change everything. The target was a column of South Tyrolean police, the 11th Company of the SS Police Regiment Bozen, who marched the same route through central Rome every afternoon, returning from a shooting range to their barracks. 3 abreast, more than 150 strong, they sang as they marched. They always took the same route. The GAP knew it. The plan was simple. The medical student we have already met, Rosario Bentivegna, dressed as a sanitation worker and pushing a garbage cart loaded with explosives, would wait on a narrow cobblestone street called Via Rasella, not far from the Trevi Fountain. When the police column entered the street, he would light the fuse and walk away. His comrades would throw mortars from a side street to maximize casualties. The bomb went off at 3:45 in the afternoon. 28 policemen were killed instantly. By the next morning, the death toll had risen to 33. Bentivegna and his comrades dispersed into the panicking crowd and escaped. It was the deadliest single partisan attack on German forces in Italy during the entire war. The fuse on something else had also been lit. They could not have known how short it was. The German response was decided that evening in a series of phone calls. SS Lieutenant Colonel Herbert Kappler, the head of the German security police in Rome, was summoned to meet Major General Kurt Melzer, the German commandant of the city. Melzer, drunk and furious, proposed burning down a section of Rome in retaliation. Kappler argued instead for executions. The proposal traveled up the chain. General Eberhard von Mackensen, commander of the 14th Army, endorsed it. Field Marshal Albert Kesselring, Supreme Commander of German forces in Italy, endorsed it. By that night, the order had come back down from the highest level of the Reich. 10 Italians killed for every dead German. The killings had to be carried out within 24 hours. There would be no public notice. There would be no offer of clemency to the partisans responsible. There would be no trial. The executions would simply happen, and Rome would learn of them afterwards. This was not chaos, it was paperwork. The number agreed was 330, 10 Italians for each of the 33 dead Germans. Kappler had until the end of the next day to find them, kill them, and dispose of the bodies. So how do you find 330 men in 24 hours? You do not have time to investigate. You do not have time to assemble evidence. You do not have time to decide whether the men deserve to die. You take what is already in your custody, and you take what your fascist allies can supply, and you take what the streets of Rome can provide. The first names came from the Gestapo prison on Via Tasso, where political prisoners had been held and tortured for weeks. Kappler took the men there. He took men from the Italian-run Regina Coeli prison, supplied by Pietro Caruso, the fascist police chief of Rome. He took prisoners awaiting trial for crimes that had nothing to do with the resistance. He took a man named Maurizio Giglio, a former lieutenant of Caruso's own, who had been unmasked as an American spy and tortured for weeks. He took men who had been arrested for hiding Jews. He took men who had been arrested for sheltering escaped Allied prisoners. He took 75 Jews who had been arrested in the October roundup of the Roman ghetto and were already destined for Auschwitz. Some of his victims were men whose only offense was being on the wrong street at the wrong time when the bomb had gone off. He took Pilo Albertelli, a 36-year-old philosophy teacher from the Liceo Umberto in Rome, who had founded the Underground Action Party and led its resistance cells in the city. Albertelli had been arrested 3 weeks earlier and tortured in a fascist detention facility with 3 broken ribs. He had tried twice to take his own life. Rather than reveal the names of his comrades, he had not. His body went on the list. He took Don Pietro Papagallo, a 55-year-old Catholic priest from a parish near Santa Maria Maggiore, who had spent the German occupation hiding Jews, partisans, escaped Allied prisoners, and any other person the Nazis were hunting in his apartment off Via Urbana. He had been betrayed by an informer in late January. The witnesses who survived the trucks to the caves remembered him giving final blessings to the men around him as they were driven to their deaths. By the morning of March 24th, the list had 335 names, 5 more than ordered. 2 SS officers who counted them at the cave decided the extra 5 could not be released because they had seen too much. They were added to the list of the dead. The transport began in the early afternoon. The prisoners were driven in trucks to the Ardeatine Caves, a network of disused pozzolana quarries on the Via Ardeatina, in what was then a quiet rural suburb south of the city. The site had been chosen because it was secluded and easily sealed afterwards. 2 SS captains, Erich Priebke and Karl Haas, supervised the killing. They had decided in advance that the prisoners would be shot rather than killed by firing squad because individual shots saved time and ammunition. They took the prisoners into the caves in groups of 5. They forced them to kneel. They shot each one in the back of the head at close range. As the killing proceeded, the bodies piled up. The next group was forced to climb onto the corpses of those who had gone before and kneel and be shot. Priebke stood at the entrance and crossed names off his list. Some of the SS shooters needed to be drunk to continue. Some refused at first and were ordered, persuaded or shamed by Kappler personally into doing it. The killing took 6 hours. When it was finished, German engineers detonated charges that collapsed the entrance tunnels and sealed the bodies inside. The Germans then issued a brief public notice in Rome. A reprisal had been carried out. The matter was closed. The location of the bodies was not disclosed. The names of the dead were not released. The bodies were not found for 2 months. Rome was liberated by the United States Fifth Army on June 4th, 1944. In late June, the new Italian authorities began excavating the caves. The work was led by a Roman professor of forensic medicine named Attilio Ascarelli. The bodies had been sealed in airless tunnels in the height of a Roman summer. They were in advanced decomposition, covered in lime, mixed together. Ascarelli's team worked for months. Of the 335 victims, they were able to identify 326 by name, primarily through personal effects, dental records, and family identifications. 9 remained unidentified. The dead were laid in individual coffins and buried in a memorial cemetery built on the site of the killings. The Fosse Ardeatine, as the site is now known, became one of the first mass grave memorials in post-war Europe. Each coffin bears the name of one of the dead. Every year, on the anniversary of the massacre, the President of the Italian Republic attends a state ceremony at the cemetery. 335 names are read out one by one. The roll call takes more than an hour. The state has remembered. It declared the site a national monument in 1949. Pope John Paul II visited, and in the Jubilee year of 2000, included Don Papagallo in the Catholic Church's official list of 20th century martyrs. The Italian state awarded Albertelli the Gold Medal of Military Valor posthumously in 1947. The school where he taught philosophy, the Liceo Umberto, was later renamed the Liceo Pilo Albertelli in his memory. The state has done what a state can do. It has named the dead. It has read the names. It has issued the medals. What the state could not do is bring the men who killed them to justice while they lived. But the story did not end when the caves were opened. In some ways, that was when the forgetting began. The men who ordered the killings were tried, but most of them did not pay for what they had done. Kesselring, Mackinson, Meltzer, and the other senior officers were sentenced to death or life imprisonment by Allied tribunals in 1945 and 47. None served their full sentences. Most were pardoned and freed by the early 1950s. Meltzer died in prison. The others returned to civilian life in West Germany and lived comfortably into old age. 2 men did serve real sentences. Herbert Kappler, the SS officer who had supervised the operation, was tried by an Italian military court in 1948 and sentenced to life imprisonment. He served his sentence at the Gaeta military prison until 1977, when, terminally ill with cancer, he was transferred to a military hospital in Rome. From there, his wife smuggled him out of the country and back to Germany. He died in Soltau the following year, a free man. Erich Priebke, the SS captain who had supervised the killings inside the caves, escaped to Argentina at the end of the war and lived openly in the Andean resort town of Bariloche for 50 years. He was identified on camera by an American journalist in 1994 and extradited to Italy in 1996. He was tried, acquitted, retried, convicted, and sentenced to life imprisonment. He served the rest of his life under house arrest in a Rome apartment and died at the age of 100. The trials, when they happened, took decades. The convictions, when they happened, were partial. Most of the men who organized the killings died comfortably in their own beds. Outside Italy, the story has mostly not traveled. There is no Hollywood film about the Ardeatine Caves. There is no equivalent place in the Anglophone imagination for what happened on March 24, 1944, to what happened at Lidus or at Oradour-sur-Glane. The forgetting is not accidental. Italy was, in the early Cold War, a frontline state of the Western Alliance. The Germans whose Wehrmacht and SS had carried out the massacres were, by the 1950s, citizens of an Allied West Germany. The political settlements that ended the war and shaped the peace did not have room for the Ardeatine Caves. They were filed under the price of a war that had to be won. The dead were filed under the price of a resistance that had to fight. 335 Italian men were killed in a quarry on the edge of Rome on March 24, 1944. They had been chosen, most of them, because they were already in custody for resisting an occupation. The men who killed them did so on direct orders from the Reich Chancellery. The men who ordered it included a field marshal, a lieutenant general, a major general, and an SS colonel. Most of them outlived the war by decades. The youngest of their victims had been 15 years old. The oldest had been over 70. The names are read every March, one by one, for more than an hour. The world mostly does not listen. If your family has a connection to wartime Rome or to the Italian resistance, or if this is a story you think more people should know, tell me in the comments. Subscribe for more stories like this.